I am contorting myself to plug in my laptop before it dies because that's about 1% left. So
yeah,
I
hope
focusing on that right now.
Before we lose all
last,
of your audio and this podcast doesn't happen.
That is my last thought.
Please get it in. That's what she said.
I'm trying to get it in, Steve. I'm trying.
I'm trying. Gotta keep that spark alive.
Wrong hole.
Oh, God. Welcome to Unqualified Opinion, the opposite of Viagra. How's it going, Scott?
It's going well, Steve. Great opening. So, sitting here, Minnesota, still snow on the ground, still cold.
Oh, the weekly weather update. Yeah, let's hear it.
It's basically the same as last week and the week before. It is actually... The last of the weather update, it is going to be 50 degrees next week. First time since October. And there are going to be people out in bathing suits. I kid you not. I've actually already seen people running in shorts. It's 30s right now. So life is good in Minnesota. Life is good.
Man, it got up to 70 here in DC for 2 days. It was so crazy. It's just really crazy how much it changes your mood when it gets so warm.
Yeah, you're telling me.
I just felt happy. Yeah, it must suck over there. You must be depressed all the time.
Oh, God, thanks.
Just really fucking miserable.
You know,
every day.
I was looking at the weather for next weekend when I'm out in DC, and it's gonna be. It's not bad. It's not bad. It's warmer than here, that is for sure. And there won't be snow. So.
Oh yeah, that's a good thing to say. Our next episode after this will be another live episode because Scott is coming to visit next weekend. And so I'm not sure what we're going to talk about, but we'll find something to talk about. I don't know. So, there's not a lot to say about DC as a place to visit, honestly.
It's a great tourist destination, but
is it though?
Yeah, if you have kids and a family and you want to go look at the national history and museums, it's great. It's free museum. You know that.
Yeah, I guess the problem is that I've done that too many times now. Every time someone comes to visit me, I end up taking them to the mall, right? The mall is what DC calls that strip that has all of the Smithsonian museums in it, the Washington Monument, the Jefferson Monument, and all that stuff. I've been to the Natural History Museum probably at least 30 times in the last 3 years.
We can go to the Baltimore Aquarium. Have you done that yet?
No, I haven't. I really want to.
Birthday present.
Fun. We don't have a car.
Take the train up.
You know what? That's totally doable.
It runs frequently.
Well, we have the party on Saturday.
Oh,
I'm hosting a party.
Yeah.
It happens to be near my birthday, but it's not a birthday party, so that's an important point.
Is that how you're billing it?
That's what it is. It just happens to be happening during a time that's very close to my birthday. But it's not a birthday party. That I want to be very clear on. But yeah, no, I'm doing pretty well myself. We did not have an idea for an episode coming into this podcast, so we just decided on one 5 minutes ago. We decided that we are going to talk about esports. So Scott doesn't think that esports are real sports. He comes from an ignorant perspective that doesn't recognize the intricacies and difficulties of esports, and he's coming in as someone who has never actually seriously watched esports as a form of entertainment. So you got to forgive his ignorance here in what he's about to say. I believe that esports require a significant amount of technical skill, and it can be incredibly entertaining, and are one of the fastest growing, which I don't think is debatable, forms of entertainment that exist now. So we'll be discussing that, but before we get into it, I apologize for being a dick. I want to talk about...
Wait.
Yes. Drinks.
Yes. That was my strategic way of stopping your, I'm sure, very fascinating story.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Oh, yeah. I mean, I did say this was going to be the opposite of Viagra, didn't I?
I was set.
We're really setting a flaccidity rate at a high level. All right. Stop me now.
I have a story about Viagra, but that's for another time. So, drinks. I had friends over last night, and they generously. So last time I went, they hosted. I went to their place. They made this beautiful gourmet meal, all homemade, and it was just divine. It was so. I mean, they put so much work into it. I mean, you know, it took all day. I'm quite sure. They come over here, and I ordered a pizza. So I'm like, I don't have all day to cook a meal, and I'm one individual, no time, and they were so generous. So I had this pizza, and then some nice cheese that I quickly bought from the grocery store, and they came over with 3 bottles of wine, 4 bottles, I don't even know, and then 2 packs of very high quality beer. I'm like, you just dropped me like $150 worth of alcohol in my house, and I am not repaying you very nicely compared to what you did. But anyway,
I mean, they sound like great.
They
friends
are great friends to have. I don't feel too bad because they're quite well off, but and I also don't feel bad about drinking all the beer they left. So the one I'm having is an IPA. It's called Hooey, Hooey. Why? And I actually have no idea. It's Lupulin Brewing. I've never ever heard of this brewing company before. It's Minnesotan. It's from Big Lake, Minnesota, which is a tiny. It's not even a suburb. It's like outside of the metro area. It's this tiny little town. There's nothing there except a brewery, apparently.
How's it taste?
It's really good. So it's tastes like a normal IPA. I don't know. It's good. It's for an IPA. It's very good. It's less hoppy than other IPAs, which makes it very easy to drink, which I appreciate.
So I don't know how well known this is, but the hoppiness of the beer doesn't refer to the bitterness of the beer. That's why oftentimes double and triple IPAs are actually less bitter than regular IPAs. The hoppiness is the kind of fruity notes and the citrusy essence of it.
Well, it's less bitter.
Really?
It's less bitter.
Okay.
Which makes it very easy to drink, which I appreciate.
Cool. So what I'm drinking, and don't judge me after your fancy beers, is this hard seltzer. Ruby grapefruit flavored. It's a 5% spiked sparkling water, and it's by White Clam.
What a basic bitch, Steve.
I do feel a little bit like a basic bitch, and they had these at work. So on Fridays they put out drinks at work, and I'm not saying I took this from work.
Oh,
but I am saying that they do have these every Friday at my work, and they have a lot more than people can finish drinking on.
And they
Friday.
have a lot less now.
I'm not saying that I took it from work. Definitely not. But that's what I'm drinking. I have 2 of them in front of me, and then when those inevitably run out, I will go back and I will probably grab something else.
Well, you better, because those I don't think those are very strong, right? It sounds like a
what? Yeah, no, they're not. They're 5%. But here's the thing that confuses me. At the bottom. And again, this is a hard seltzer. It says in fine print, beer with natural flavors. Are they trying to claim that this hard seltzer is a beer?
It sounds like a, yeah. I don't know, Steve. It has
weird.
alcohol in it, right?
Yeah, but that doesn't make it a beer.
And does it taste good?
I mean, it tastes like hard seltzer, so it tastes solidly mediocre.
I mean, that's all you can ask for. If it's a beer, is it a wine? Is it a cider? Is it?
I mean, it doesn't taste like it has alcohol in it. Honestly, it tastes like sparkling water. It tastes like a sweeter LaCroix. That's what it tastes.
You better hurry up and drink that then.
Yeah, I'm almost done with the first one
Yeah,
and about to crack open the second one.
Finish that up.
It's just sparkling water, basically.
You have the most unusual drinks every time. I just like basic beer, basic wine, basic beer.
I mean, that wasn't a basic beer, you know. But I'm trying to switch it up. I'm trying to keep the audience members entertained so that people can listen to what we're drinking and think, you know what? I want to try that too.
So they can keep their dicks up.
I wonder... Oh, God. Yeah, we're already we haven't even started the topic, and we're already spiraling downhill. So, moving on. Esports is what we're going to talk about. So, when I was in high school, I played Dota when it was still an extension of Warcraft 3, if anyone remembers that game. That's not World of Warcraft, for any of you ridiculous people who don't remember what Warcraft 3 is, which was one of the best RTS games that were created at the time. Thank you, Blizzard. Yeah, and so Warcraft 3 had this game maker tool, and some creative genius created this game called Dota on it, and it was just some random game that you could occasionally go into Battle.net on, and you can play, and it was great. And then that picked up a bunch of steam. Dota actually eventually became its own individual game, and then League of Legends was created based on Dota, though Dota continued to be played. Now League of Legends is either the biggest or one of the biggest, I don't know if it's bigger than StarCraft, esports industries now. I played the original Dota on Warcraft 3. It was a lot of fun, but that's as far as I got. And I have a lot of high school friends who continue to play Dota and continue to play League, and they watch all that stuff. So most people who talk about esports either talk about League of Legends or StarCraft if you're more old school. I guess these days Fortnite also comes into play. What I'm trying to say with my story is that I have a small inkling of an understanding of why those games are entertaining for people to watch. And I did play a lot of StarCraft and StarCraft Brood War, and I didn't get into StarCraft 2. So there's that. What I watch pretty regularly is Smash Bros. Melee. And so for anyone, and I don't know how anyone would not know what this game is, Super Smash Bros. Is a franchise. There are now, I believe, 5. There's the original Smash Bros. There's Super Smash Bros. Melee. There's Brawl. There's Smash 4, which is, you know, Brawl is garbage. There's no competitive play there, but the other ones have competitive play. And then there's Ultimate. I can get into Ultimate, but I think Scott is completely uninterested in that.
I don't know what that is.
I think it's really ridiculous. There's a recent change in EVO, which is a big tournament that they have where they kicked out Melee in favor of Ultimate, which was ridiculous. But we won't get into that. Okay, I'm just going over my background for now. Okay, so obviously, like most people who grew up in the 90s, I played Smash Bros. Because it came out in Smash Bros. Melee because it came out in 2001, and it was this really novel game. So Super Smash Bros. Is basically take a bunch of Nintendo characters and have them fight in this 2-dimensional space, right? And when they fall off or get thrown off the stage, they die. You have certain stocks, and then when you hit people, you do more percentage to them, and the higher the percentage goes, the easier they are to fly off. And when you fly off and you lose enough stocks, then you die. And the whole purpose is to stay alive and eliminate the other person's stocks. And every character has different moves that are specific to that character in their respective games. So you would have, for instance, characters like Yoshi or Mario or Bowser or Falco, Ganondorf, Captain Falcon. Anyway. So I watch a lot of Smash Bros. Melee. I watched the recent Genesis 6 where HBox won again, which is really frustrating for a lot of people who watch Melee because he plays Jigglypuff, and a lot of people don't believe that Jigglypuff is a very legitimate character to play. But I'm not going to get into that as of right now. All I'm trying to say is
the most realistic.
Okay, yeah, I get that. I get that it is for you. Let me try to actually condense this into a single statement so that we can actually start a conversation instead of just having me ramble. So what I'm trying to say is I watch a lot of Melee, and as you can see with the way I'm rambling, there, like with other sports, there's a lot of drama, and there's a large environment around the competitive aspect of these video games. There are tournaments. People compete in tournaments. People get sponsored by different companies, and people will train continuously to be able to win in these tournaments. And especially in a game like Melee, and what is enticing about it to me is that, like with other sports, when someone plays a sport, they have a semblance of the difficulty of that sport. And then when they see professionals play it, they can truly respect how difficult it is for people to get to the level of the professionals that they admire. It's similar with esports. Speaking about my perspective, I play Melee, and there are a lot of difficult and complicated moves to execute. And it's really, really entertaining to be able to watch high-level players execute at, an incredibly high level, and add the competitive nature of it. And I believe that the underlying metrics that make other sports valuable for spectators exist with esports.
All right. Now, I don't hold a strong opinion on this. But what Steve is saying, I think, in general, is that a sport where you hold something in your hands and use a variety of combinations of thumb presses and index finger presses is a sport. And essentially, right, Steve? Because that's the mechanics of it, right? It's thumb and index finger.
I mean, I think it depends on the sport that you're talking about, because if you're talking about something like StarCraft or any kind of PC game, the mechanics of how you execute on that
those are different. Yeah,
different
that's a bunch of clicks with your index finger.
Not just your index finger. But yes,
well, I
get what you're trying to say. What you're trying to say is it's a bunch of minute dexterity-based movements with your hands.
I see sports as the embodiment of physical achievement. And so I struggle to use the word, I don't care what word you use, you can use sports, it's fine, but I struggle to use the word sports on things like this because it's not a physical, they're not reaching the physical apex of a particular movement outside of moving their fingers in a rapid succession of different patterns. It's the same reason why curling is not a sport. It's people with broomsticks. Well, let's not go there. But I guess.
Well, it's an interesting idea because I think you're drawing the line of what is a sport, in a much less forgiving place than most people would, right? Most people would consider curling a sport. Most people would consider bowling a sport. And I'm guessing if you don't believe curling is a sport, you probably don't think bowling is a sport
either.
And it's based on the physical aspect.
I see it as the physical. I find sports enjoyable to watch because it's like they're pushing the physical limits of what's possible with the human body in a certain way, and then you combine that physical excellence with the mental aspect of the game. And I think esports have the mental aspect of the game. There's no denying that, right? It has that in spades.
Yeah,
right?
I did want to touch on that point because I think that's important.
For me, a sport is the mental and the physical together. And I don't see the physical component in the esports. And I think
that's an interesting point. Okay, so let's unpack that. The first thing to get out of the way in terms of what we both agree on is that at a strategic level, esports can be just as sophisticated as other sports when it comes.
Well,
to
yeah,
the
I think
strategic
again
aspect
it
of
depends on the esport. I think like Smash Bros may have less strategy involved than.
Oh, that's not true at all.
Well, because isn't it more based on how good you are at executing certain moves rather than like.
No, that's a baseline. No. So there are a vast number of different things that can influence how successful a character is. But one thing that's really, really important, for instance, just to give a specific example, is your matchup knowledge, right?
I don't know
Let me
what
give
is
two examples.
that?
So your matchup knowledge. So matchup knowledge is you know that the tools of the specific character that you're using, and you know the tools of the character that your opponent is using, and based on those, you utilize different approaches in the way that you attack, in the way that you defend, right? In the way that you recover, recover meaning when you get thrown off, how you recover back onto the stage, and all of that changes in really intricate ways depending on which character you're pitted against. So you have to have a vast array of knowledge to understand how to do that, and then on top of it, you have to be able to execute those things properly. The other one, that's a really kind of a sophisticated strategic look, is how do you play what's called your neutral game. And what that means is when neither character has landed a move and can start a combo, how do you figure out how to bait your character into making certain moves? How do you do any kind of fakes, or how do you do ways to approach an attack zone? It's really complicated, and it goes on multiple layers. So, for instance, based on what's called the metagame, which means kind of the assessment of the way people assess how the game should be played, you can it's like poker, right? You think that somebody is going to play a certain hand because of the cards that are on the table, but then there's the fact that you think that the other person thinks that you would think that they would play this certain hand, and it keeps going at that level. All of that complexity is happening at a very rapid pace in a game, even if it seems very simple to people who are just casual players or casual viewers as Melee. So I would disagree with the assumption that Smash Bros would be purely based on technical execution.
Okay, sure. I agree.
But okay, so the part I think that we can both agree on is that, and let's use a more mainstream example, a game like StarCraft, right? Do you know what StarCraft is, Scott?
Not really.
So StarCraft is an RTS game, which stands for real-time strategy.
Yeah.
It's a game where basically you amass resources, you build out a bunch of different units and buildings.
Like Age of Empires.
Use them to engage in a mini war. Yeah, it's like Age of Empires, but the units can do more complicated things than you could in Age of Empires, right?
Okay.
It's like that, but at a higher level. So let's take a game like that. I mean, I think we both agree that the strategic element can get just as sophisticated as other non-esport sports.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So the real question is the physical aspect. And I find your premise really, really interesting because at a gut emotional level, I feel that too with a lot of different sports. So I was chuckling when you mentioned something like curling, and we're talking about how, you know, a lot of players don't really have to be in peak physical form. There's skill involved. There's technical skill involved. But at the same time, when you look at someone who does curling, you don't necessarily think that looks like an athlete, right?
Right.
I think this is really the case with something like baseball, because you can't deny that it takes an enormous amount of skill to be able to hit that ball, you know, speeding so quickly at some consistent level. But then you look at some of these guys, and they're just super fat, and they're smoking, and they don't look like athletes.
Well, but if you compare like baseball versus curling, baseball, they do have to be more athletic. I mean, this is a bit of an aside, but they do have to be more athletic, right? They have to exert brute force when hitting the ball. They have to be able to run relatively quickly, right, to make it to the base.
Depends on how hard they hit it, right?
Depends on how hard. If they're really, really strong and hit really hard, they don't have to run as quickly, or they can just walk.
Yeah, that's fair.
But there is, and then different positions, right? Well, they have to. I mean, if you look at the sizes of people on baseball, it's actually really interesting because some of them are definitely like, maybe a little overweight, but some of them are in really good shape. It depends on what position you play, right? Like how much you have to run and how agile do you have to be. But unlike curling, which is very static sport, quote unquote. In my view, I mean, it's like, I don't know if anyone else really holds this view, and probably other people do. It's like the ancient Greek perception of sport. It is like a triumph and celebration of the human body and what it's capable of.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love that you can take that and then combine it with the mental side. It's like you have to think how you use your body in a certain way. That for me is like the epitome of what sport is. And
I'm not trying to say that the physical achievements of esports, quote unquote, athletes mirror those of, say, soccer players or basketball players or anyone in one of these more widely recognized sports. That would be ludicrous. But what I do want to say about the technical execution and the physical achievement portion of it is that I think it's really hard to deny that technical execution at the level that these people are doing it is incredibly, incredibly difficult, right? These guys and girls, but not many, train very, very hard. If you look at what's happening in League of Legends, these gamers will train 12 to 14 hours a day. They will put themselves on tons of caffeine and taurine and Adderall to be able to fuel their ability to train in these very specific ways that do involve technical execution. There's training. So I don't know as much about League of Legends. I'm sure this happens there too, but in Smash for sure, people will train just physical movements because there are subtleties in the way that you move the controller, and people get RTS issues because of it, because it's this rapid repetitive motion. So what I'm trying to say is technical execution in a lot of these games actually requires a very high degree of skill. Sure, it doesn't mean you have to be able to run a marathon to be able to do it, but you still have to train. I do think in many cases just as hard as certain what would be considered sports.
So you've seen the famous South Park episode, the Warcraft one, right? I think.
Yeah, a long time ago. So you got to.
So it's like, Cartman. I can't remember the premise of it at all, but I know it ends up with them playing World of Warcraft, and in typical South Park fashion, Cartman is there and he's screaming at his mom to bring him food, and then a bowl that he can shit in so he can keep playing World of Warcraft. And I'm sorry, but that is just embedded and drilled into my memory of people who play esports. Eric Cartman from South Park, whose finger is going to be technically impressive, but who have their mothers bring them bowls so they can shit in so they don't have to leave the game.
Of course, that's not how it actually works.
I know.
But I get what you're saying. I totally get what you're saying. And I get that resistance for a lot of people. But I will say that the audience for esports is massive. Like, we're talking StarCraft, League of Legends, bigger audiences than the NBA.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean, you can't deny that this has been incredibly, incredibly popular, right? And I think one of the reasons that it's so popular, right, and it's gotten to this point is that it seems approachable. It seems doable, right? A lot of kids can, or not even just kids, anyone. Adults can see people playing these games and think, if I just grind as hard as this guy, maybe I can get that. You can keep that dream alive. Whereas I look at a basketball game and I'm 5'6", and no matter how hard I believe I'm going to grind, I'm never going to make it on one of those teams,
Right.
right? So I think there is an element there where it's just it seems more approachable, and that's why it's so popular. Bit of a side tangent.
So something I wanted to mention, I think we've talked about this before, is childhood obesity, which is a serious issue in this country, worst in the world. And the role now, I think there's a lot of places you could take this, but the role of sports, traditional sports, play and can play in helping that, right? So I remember, and I was like one of those kids who loved playing computer games in school, and I was also in elementary school, and also a little overweight in elementary school. And I remember it's like I could have an option to go out and play basketball or soccer or whatever, kickball, or I could stay and play video games or like on the computer because I was friends with the typical teacher's pet. My best friend, his mom was my teacher, so she let me stay in the classroom with him during recess and play computer games.
Really?
Yes.
I guess this shouldn't surprise me, but given your stance currently, this kind of surprises me.
Well, and that's partly, it's like, and I'm like, while I'm looking back at it, I wish I had gone outside. I wish I had been more physically active and participated in sports more than I did. And there is an issue now where you have kids who, rather than go outside, because it's so accessible, because playing online is so accessible, as is basketball, right? But you can play online. You can't play basketball sitting on your couch. You can play online sitting on your couch. You have kids opting for that rather than going outside and being physically active and leading largely that plus like shitty food in America to childhood obesity. It's like, because it's addictive, right? Like how a sport may be addictive in a good way, right? Like this is if
it can be more addictive because you can code the games, especially if you're thinking about like mobile games that people play. But that's not the same as esports and competitive gaming. But I get what you're trying to say there. And I do want to talk about that. I just want to make one quick point that I think we should address, in that gaming isn't going to be all bad for kids, right?
No.
There are a lot of tangible benefits. I want to get that out first before we discuss this rise in obesity.
I agree.
So we don't get distracted by it, right? So, gaming's been proven to improve, obviously, dexterity, but also problem-solving skills for a lot of kids, strategic decision-making, and that kind of thing. But I do agree with you that there is a wide prevalence of kids over-abusing gaming. And I think that you can overuse and abuse a lot of different things. And I think that gaming is designed to be addictive. I agree with you. But I think a lot of the responsibility then falls on parents to be able to properly restrict that kind of thing. When I was growing up, my parents would make sure that I was only allowed to play video games for the number of minutes that I played piano. That was their trade-off for me, and that worked out really well. And I think obviously no parents will ever listen to this podcast, but I think it's important to set those restrictions, right? To either at least set those restrictions or at least find some way of having the children understand the negative impact.
Yeah, but it's really hard to tell your child to go play outside when all of their friends are playing online, right? It's it's like it's difficult. It's very, so, and then because the whole point of physical activity is that you have other people to play with outside. So I mean, on an individual level, you tell your kid to go play outside, like they can go play by themselves, right? But
yeah, I mean, I had a twin brother, so for me it was always easy.
Right.
Like we'll just go outside together and like hang out, And I think children these days are really different. And we were talking about what topics to do, and I think that what we really should do is do a topic on kids these days. And you mentioned that actually on children.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to go too far into this, but I think it's a really interesting topic. And I think that there are a multitude of factors that affect obesity, and gaming is definitely one of them, but it's something that can be managed. And I don't think it discounts from the value that a lot of esports or a lot of gaming in general presents, or the value, to tie this back in, that esports provides as an entertainment vehicle.
Well, I'm not saying gaming leads to obesity. I'm saying a sedentary lifestyle leads to obesity, and like gaming is not, in its current form, an active, a physically active thing. Or I mean, could there be a way where you could do actually virtual reality? I think that's really interesting, where you can actually go out and kind of like modern day laser tag, right? Where
have you seen Ready Player One? You know the full body suit in Ready Player One?
No.
Okay, so Ready Player One is a book that's set in the future, in the near future, but everyone basically goes into this virtual world, and you can buy this full body suit, and you can like be in it. Anyway, so what I want to get at is, if we had that kind of a setup for virtual reality sports, would you consider those sports?
I would probably consider more sports than sitting in your butt. Yeah. Yeah, I probably would.
You would. Okay. So the biggest limitation for you is that it's incredibly sedentary, and there's not a lot of, I don't know, your heart rate getting pumped up or anything like that.
For me, I mean, it's a sport has athletes for that, and I have it's not so much that I have a hard time calling esports sports. It's a hard time calling people who play esports athletes.
But why? Let's break down exactly why, because I think it's important to note that these esports athletes do have very strict regimens. They train really hard. They put in a ton of work to learn their craft, and they are constantly in competitive environments. All of those things check the boxes of other athletic endeavors. They have training regimens. They will compete in very, very competitive environments and tournaments. There will be prizes, and they will be dealing with the same kinds of mental pressures that any other athletes would. So I'm trying to understand what makes them not athletes.
To be honest, I could probably admit that they could consider them athletes. I think my biggest issue, well, actually, interestingly enough, I did just look up the root word, Latin word, athleta. Guess what it is? You would never guess.
No, I have no idea.
A wrestler or a prize fighter who is a contestant in public games. Isn't that interesting? It's actually nothing to do with like a bod. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure the assumption was it's like, no shit, it has to do with like being physically active, because this is ancient Greece, but or ancient Rome.
Yes, but it comes down to two parts, right? The physical part, and then the competitive nature of whatever physical activity they're engaged in.
I guess for me the biggest worry is the impact on youth. I mean, holding this up, because so many kids look up, or I don't even know if they do anymore.
Up as a virtue.
Look up to athletes.
Yeah. Like this is something to strive for.
And I just don't see esports as something to strive, because I don't see like pause outside.
So you don't think it's healthy to strive to become an esports?
I wouldn't say it's not healthy, but I
don't think it's a good thing.
I think it is. I'm not saying it's negative, but I see it as far less positive to healthy physical development than promoting a sport where you actually move and burn calories.
So I think it's really interesting to talk about whether or not esports is healthy. First off, for the athletes themselves, right? And then also as a cultural phenomenon that people are clearly going to be influenced by and strive for. So it sounds like, Scott, you think that on both fronts it's very unhealthy.
I would say very.
Fair assessment of your position?
I would. I don't know a lot about this, and so I'm not gonna venture. And it's also a very new phenomenon. So there haven't been a lot of really good studies that have been conducted over long periods of time on impacts of this, right? Because it's a relatively new phenomenon. So it's kind of like we don't know what we don't know at this point. But I think there are longitudinal studies is what I was looking for. I think there are some areas of concern that you'd want to think about as being potentially negative.
Yeah. So the obvious one, starting with athletes, RSI, right? The effect on your fingers and your joints from all the rapid movement. So that's clear. Again, you said the sedentary lifestyle just being naturally unhealthy for people. I think the RSI stuff, you're not going to be able to fix that. The sedentary lifestyle thing is easily fixable. I mean, a lot of us in modern society deal with a sedentary lifestyle. I have a standing desk at work. I will stand it up for at least 5 hours of the 9 hours that I'm typically at work. I'll go on at least 2 walks.
Quick on standing desks. It actually, a lot of the new research is showing that it's actually equally not great to stand.
Are you kidding me?
God damn it. The benefit is the movement. It's the up down movement. It's not standing or sitting. It is going up and down, or going on walks, right? So actually, that's just so. I mean, I'm going on a quick tangent here, but it's so fascinating because so much. I work in HR, so this like ergonomics and stuff is a big part of what our office does, and so much. Billions and billions and billions of dollars have been put into redesigning offices to have the standing desks, which are not cheap.
No, they're not.
When you think about how many workers are in America and how many are provided standing desks.
I had no idea that it's not. Why it seems so intuitive that it would be very healthy and effective.
And that's why there was so much investment, because like, of course it's healthy for you.
I mean, it's got to be healthier than sitting.
And it is so marginal.
Really?
That it is, yeah.
What?
And it's also bad for your feet because humans were not meant to stand in one spot for 5
totally
hours.
Makes sense. I will say,
right? Nor were they meant to sit for 5 hours.
I will say that when I work, I dance, so that helps. I stay a little bit more mobile. So my advice to anyone:
I work in HR. I can't dance.
Dance while you work. It's become a known thing in my office actually that I'm a weirdo who dances while I work.
Pro tip from Steve. Anyway.
No, but I think what I'm trying to say is I think there are steps you can take. And if you look at the reality of our workforce now, I don't believe that people who do esports professionally / full-time are going to naturally be more sedentary than people who do standard 9 to 5, white collar jobs. And in both cases, there's a high risk of that issue, but you can take steps to keep yourself mobile and you can exercise and do those kinds of things.
Well, I'm not saying that as an adult it's necessarily going to be a negative health impact because
so you don't think for the athletes it's that negative. I mean, I do think the RSI issues are a serious thing. I mean, I think that there's a current culture within gaming that is pretty negative where people don't emphasize and prioritize health. But I think that those things can change, and I don't think that esports necessitates unhealthy behavior.
Well, I would be very fascinated in the comparative study of people who do esports in the U.S. versus people who do esports, for example, in what is like a low obesity country, China.
Korea. I would say
fairly active. Korea.
Esports,
Korea. And do a comparison, right? Because I mean, assuming that they generally sit in the same spot, But I bet you the Koreans are going to be all because they have better food. Like, just the built environment is made for walking and being more active than it is
But I
in
do
America.
know that the health issues are
Right.
catching up in Korea because esports is becoming a big thing. So, you know.
Right. And I think my concern would be more with the development of children. And I get you before we go on about whether gaming is good. I mean, yes, there are some positive social benefits of gaming, and I think part of that research was kind of a backlash against this original perception of gaming as being just really detrimental in all aspects to development. And I think a lot of researchers have really tempered that. I wouldn't say I've seen anything that's been so convincing to say, like, it is the best thing ever and they get better benefits out of this than being outside and interacting with people face to face. I haven't seen things like that, but I do think it is, it's not bad, and it does help. It definitely helps. It's not a negative draw. It's definitely a positive add to, like, social interaction.
As long as it's done in moderation.
It's done in moderation, right? But I think for a child who does need a lot of physical activity, it's just another reason to not be physical. And now it's like another reason for parents to be like, oh, little Johnny is playing his sport. As in, he's sitting on his butt. Right? And so it's even like a less of an incentive for parents to have their children go out and play, because now it's like a legitimate thing that the kid is doing. It's not just like playing video games, it's playing a sport. And not that in itself was negative, but the fact that then the parents don't have less leverage to actually make the kid go be active. So that's why I'm less concerned about adults, because like adults have reached a stage of maturity where their bodies aren't developing anymore. Kids need that activity. They need physical activity to develop properly. And that would be my concern. So I think the question is, because it's not going away, obviously. Like, it's not going away. The question is, how I think the question is, how do you make it more physical? Because I don't think esports is going away.
Well,
right?
I don't think
it's like,
you're going to make it more physical in the way that you're talking about in terms of movement and exercise. I think the draw of a lot of these esports is the intricacy of the strategy that's possible within the constraints of execution that require these really subtle inputs. And so you're just not going to get that. I think the more important question is, how do we as a culture temper the idea of esports being this really interesting and naturally entertaining phenomenon that can be a very promising, end goal for a lot of people, with the known side effects and detrimental impacts of it. And I agree with you. I don't think that we're at a good place right now in terms of being able to recognize that, because there isn't a nuanced conversation about it. It's either esports are terrible and they're not very legitimate, and they're making these kids' brains into mush and they're making them fat, versus esports are incredible, they're just as good as other sports, and they're totally legitimate, and really the answer is somewhere in the middle. Really, kids, in the same way that kids probably shouldn't be playing piano for 10 hours a day, they definitely shouldn't be playing esports for 10 hours a day. It's not healthy, and kids need to be exposed to a diversity of experiences. And again, not to harp on the whole kids thing, for every individual who is looking at this, or every parent who's looking at this for their kids, they have to recognize that this has to be part of a diverse set of experiences to be engaged in. I think that's the biggest thing. And it is known that a lot of really, really intense, especially in Korea, esports gamers face health issues because they neglect these other aspects of their life. So I'm not saying that those problems don't exist, and I'm just saying that it's the same with anything else, and we've built cultural norms around other more sedentary and yet positive behaviors. Right. We have to do the same.
The interesting thing for me is one of the interesting things is, if you think about regulation sports, basketball, baseball, football, of course, is really big in high school. There are rules and regulations around, like, especially now with, concussion concerns and actually physical, a huge one. And also, even in non-impact sports like that, there has been an issue of coaches pushing kids too far to the point where it's unhealthy. And because it's regulated.
A big one is wrestling, for instance. Super unhealthy if you think about how people will fast in order to make weight in high school.
I'm even talking about, like what is the cross training, CrossFit? If people do it really, really hard, you can actually have negative health impacts from it because you're exerting your body beyond what it's meant to be doing. And the same thing can happen in sports where coaches push kids so far physically that it is bad for their bodies. And actually you can die from it. And there's actually been cases of kids dying from being pushed too far. And the thing with that, because it's regulated, a school or the league can come in and say, you can't do that anymore. You have to have this long for practice. You can't go longer. If it's this hot outside, you can't practice outside. So you have someone to set rules and boundaries, because esports is it's quintessentially deregulated. I mean, there's no, compared to a lot of these league sports, you don't have people saying, and there's no way to enforce someone to say, oh, you can only practice X number of hours a day, or you have to do these things so you're like a healthy whole person, which will make you a better competitor. Right? You don't have any of that, and there's absolutely no way to enforce that because the game is, physically, you don't do it with other people. You do it with other people, but like in the physical space, you're just by yourself. You could just be by yourself. So there's no way to really enforce it. So I think that could be a really issue if it really picks up and actually starts, entering schools. There's no way to actually regulate it, at least right now.
I think there
and
will
set
be
boundaries and
process
parameters.
To figure out how to regulate it. I don't think there's no way to regulate it. I think that
there could be ways. Yeah.
The sophistication around that isn't there yet. I think we're starting to get to the end around here, and I just kind of want to wrap up and say it sounds like you've moved a little bit in terms of your position about being able to claim esports as real sports. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that would be a fair assessment.
Okay. And I do acknowledge your concerns with the effects of esports culturally, especially to children. And so I think this has been one of our more reasonable debate episodes. Actually, I think we're growing up a little bit.
I think so.
So I think this was I feel like this is a good place to wrap up. Do you have any final thoughts?
I don't think so. I think that was a very civil conversation.
Surprising.
Surprisingly so.
Yeah, which is great. All right. Well, have a good one, Scott.
Until next time.